Welcome to episode 245 of the DFO Rundown, brought to you by Betano 19 Plus. Please play responsibly. The game starts now at betano.ca. I'm Jason Greger, alongside Frank Saravalli, who is back home after being in Pittsburgh for opening night on Tuesday. We saw Connor Bedard get his first assist, then he gets his first goal. The Hawks get their first win. And also their first serious injury, as Taylor Hall is now out with a headshot. Frank, there's lots happening in the first few days of the NHL.
Yeah, there is. And lots happening today. Before we get rolling, I just wanted to say quickly, today is the day that Chris Snow is being laid to rest in Calgary. I know that we've talked about Chris Snow and his 4-year valiant battle with ALS, but wanted to send our sincerest condolences to the Flames family. This is a hole that they won't be able to fill. And I don't really shamelessly promote my stuff, but I really wanted, if I could, to direct you to dailyfaceoff.com. I've got a story posted. I spent more than an hour on the phone yesterday with Brad Treliving, who poured out his heart talking about Chris Snow, and the entire piece, if you want to get to know Chris Snow a bit and learn about the human spirit, it's entirely in Brad Treliving's words. And I cried my way through writing it this morning. Really, really powerful stuff. And I'd appreciate it if you gave it a read.
Well, we look forward to that. And, Chris, his wife, Kelsey, she's written a lot over the years. I really respect them because sometimes people don't want to share your grief and you want to share your hardships. And they were an open book, I think, for the ALS community, really opening the eyes for a lot of people of just the reality of living with ALS. And, Chris's attitude and their 2 children and his wife along the way, I think was really inspiring for a lot of people. And I get a sense that there was lots of people in the hockey community that maybe never met Chris Snow or Kelsey, but kind of felt like they knew him through their words and their willingness to share their journey. So
you'll feel like you knew him if you read this piece.
Yeah. Well, I look forward to that. Awesome. So that'll be an emotional day in Calgary. The Flames get a win for him. Of course, Kelsey and the kids were there for the ceremonial puck drop last night. So an emotional time in Calgary. You know what? I know it's only a hockey game, but small little things like that, small victories, shall we say, will be good for the Flames. There are a few things, Frank. We are going to do our Atlantic division preview today, so we'll get to that. Owen Power just signed his new contract, 8-year extension to go along with Rasmus Dahlin. We'll get to that when we get to Buffalo. A few other things, I guess. Give me your early impressions of young Bedard.
So good. Like, legit, and it's a shame that Taylor Hall's out because I talked to him for a while after the game in Pittsburgh. And his stories were great. You can find them on Frankly Speaking when it drops about Connor Bedard. But he was saying, I just said point blank, Taylor, how good is this kid? And he said, look, I don't want to create any headlines for you, make it bigger than it should be, but, quote, he's the real deal. I mean, that to me, I was like, okay, this guy has seen more number 1 picks than anyone on planet Earth. And he's been with Connor McDavid. Like, this guy is really, really good. And you watch him in his first 2 games and you can see that. I said 102 points. Everyone thought I was crazy. Not saying it's definitely going to happen, but 2 points in his first 2 games and probably could have had a whole bunch more. Don't be surprised if he puts up a phenomenal season.
Well, more exciting players in the league is only better.
How about the eyeballs?
Lots of people
record
watching.
In the U.S. Yeah. It was the most watched regular season game in NHL history on cable that wasn't the Winter Classic.
Oh, I didn't know that.
1.4 million is what they drew on ESPN on opening night.
Well, that's good. Chicago's a pretty good hockey market. Pittsburgh, but I think there's good hockey fans. It doesn't have to be their team when they want to watch players. And I think even ESPN's getting that. They got a Canadian team that's featured with McDavid and Draisaitl numerous times, right?
12 times this year for the Oilers on national TV, which is big. Connor Bedard's first 5 road games, all on national TV. I love that. People are saying already, people are tweeting me, oh, stop it with Bedard. Stop tweeting about him. They have Bedard fatigue. I'm like, what way do you guys want it? You either like, hey, first, on one hand, people are saying the NHL doesn't do a good enough job promoting its young stars. And then on the other hand, everyone's like, shut up already.
Yeah, well, I wouldn't say everyone. It's usually the vocal minority. Let's be real here. So,
isn't that what Twitter is?
you look at their schedule, right? They play Pittsburgh, then they're Boston, then they got Montreal, then they got Toronto, like, and then Colorado. Like, they are playing some big dogs early on in the season.
The Blackhawks were happy about that. They were like, Bedard's going to go to all these tough places to play on the road, and then boom, that's it. Under his belt, and he's got it. He knows what it's like now.
Yeah, well, should be good. The Vancouver Canucks, despite dehydration for their goalie, big win last night, 8-1. Oh, well, not even a big one, a spanking. Edmonton's only been handed a 7-goal deficit 15 times, Frank. Last night was the 3,400th game in Oilers franchise history in the regular season, and only 15 times have they lost by 7 or more goals. So, Oilers fans, a welcome treat. And I say that facetiously, of course, to start the season for them. But Brock Boeser, 4 goals. Connor Garland scored a goal, Frank, and, he's asked for a trade. But, I was told that the Canucks, had been trying to move him all summer to no avail. And the only way he's going to get traded, if he still wants to get traded, is to produce. Yeah,
I mean, that's your ticket out of town, right? Yeah. He was pretty coy about the idea of the trade request. And I think it's just a mutual thing. Like, it's been no secret. He's been on my trade board like for quite literally years that he could be moved, and the Canucks were trying to move the contract. It almost felt like from the second he signed that deal in Van that he wasn't comfortable. He admitted almost as much after his first year. And so to think that anyone is sitting here surprised as the Canucks have looked for cap flexibility, Jim Rutherford came out right after the Casey DeSmith trade and said, we're not done. We'd like to move a contract or two. And in parentheses, that was always Connor Garland. So I actually happen to really like the player. I think he's someone that plays way bigger than his size. He needs to be more consistent. The work ethic has always been there. The talent has always been there. Go back to his days playing minor hockey. You know who his teammate was in Boston?
Nope.
Jack Eichel. You know who the leading scorer on the team was?
Connor Garland. Well, no, hey, the guy's got some skill, but he's also got basically a $5 million cap hit.
It's the 3 years that's the problem.
Mm-hmm.
The cap hit is not great, of course, but if this was the last year of his deal, I think so, and the Canucks were giving him away for free, someone would take him off their hands. Yeah, it's the third year. That's the problem. It's not even the second year.
Yeah, you're probably right. Cap is going up in the final 2 years of that deal, so that should help him. But I'll say this: if he gets off to a good start, Frank, well, it changes everything. Maybe the Canucks are all of a sudden like, oh, well, geez, maybe now we like the production. Or B, other teams are all of a sudden going to go because where you have teams, 8 in LTIR already, and so many, with less than $500,000 in cap space, it's pretty difficult to trade a $5 million player. You're going to basically have to bring back close to it or eat half of it.
So let's talk about cap space. 4 teams on opening night dressing one man short on their roster because either an untimely injury or a suspension or whatever it might be that forced their hand. First off, it speaks to the bullshit factor that the league and the PA are now in a 4th consecutive season of a flat cap world. This should have been negotiated this past summer. The PA felt like they were giving something up if they changed the escrow amount, which I think there was a way to do it and softly adjust that and not have it make a difference to players. But nonetheless, here we are. Not only has it cost players jobs by virtue of 5-6 years ago, every team was carrying 23 guys. Now some teams are carrying 21 on game days, 20. Players are being shuttled back and forth to the minors on paper transactions to save cap space. And 4 freaking teams on opening night are going 11-6, including the Canucks and Oilers head-to-head in Van. Disappointing.
Yeah, I'm sure the players don't love it. Many moons ago, Frank, I mentioned the thought that I think the NHL could play 11-6 every night, and it wouldn't be a big deal. And
the Oilers like 11-7, obviously, and then you see how little their 7th guy plays. Yeah. They're used to it, but my point is, this is not the way it should be. we shouldn't all just nod our head and be like, oh yeah, nothing to see here.
So you're saying there should have been a negotiation on both sides to somehow change it?
Yeah, I mean,
Increase
the
the salary
debt
cap
that's
more?
owed from players to owners down to $50 million will be paid off in the first couple weeks of the season, and
Yeah.
was a no doubter.
Mhm.
To be in a flat cap environment for a fourth consecutive year is bananas.
It does seem odd, and well, you know how the negotiations go between the PA and the NHL. It's rarely one that happens quickly or easily. So don't color me surprised on this one, Frank, that the two sides couldn't come to a rational agreement.
Mm-hmm.
Right? It's not just not how it goes, really. So anything else before we get to the Atlantic preview in the first 2 days stand out for you?
No, let's dive in. We got 8 teams of ground to cover and our last preview.
Yeah, and well, which is good. This division obviously is very competitive. What's interesting to note, Frank, the Atlantic Division, like the Pacific Division, has never had 5 teams in the playoffs in 1 year, ever. So a lot of both of us picked the Pacific for the first time to have 5. So we'll see when we're done if the Atlantic is in the same position. So
I'd be surprised if it's not a 4-4 split.
Yeah, it might be. Yeah, we'll start from the bottom. Let's start with the Montreal Canadiens, who are in another rebuilding season. I think they're going to be an exciting team to watch, Frank, but they're also going to be a team that I don't believe is going to win a lot of hockey games. Exciting game last night against Toronto, but I think that's kind of what you're going to get with Montreal. Is they're not very good defensively.
So I'm going to push back against that. I agree they're not good defensively, but I think they're a really exciting team. I think they're going to win more games than you think, and I think their forward group is playoff caliber.
Really? Okay.
I said I one of my bold predictions is Cole Caulfield has 50 goals. You saw a pretty nice 2-goal start from Alex Newhook. That would be a real shot in the arm. He gets a real opportunity. Not that he didn't in Colorado, but it just kind of felt like it never really fit. And they're pretty excited about him in Montreal. And I think you see the continued growth from Kirby Dach, and you get a healthy Josh Anderson, a healthy Brendan Gallagher. Like I think this team is a lot closer if you start to get some steps from Slavkovsky and others to really being a dangerous team.
Oof. Man,
what don't you like about it?
Look at their defense.
I acknowledge that off the start. I said their defense is not close.
Yeah, well, so to me, it's hard. They can have all the great forwards they want, which is why I think they're going to score, but they're going to give up a lot. And I think that's ultimately going to be their demise. So, like I said, I think they'll be an exciting team to watch, Frank. But what I mean exciting is because, you know what, I'm not saying 6-5 is going to be the norm, but there'll be a lot of nights where they're giving up 4+ goals.
Marty St. Louis was saying, though, he's already sensing with this team that there is a fight in them. There is a don't count them out in games, which is kind of ironic to say after in the opener they blew a 5-3 third period lead.
Late.
Yeah, that I actually really like what they're building there. I think they are on the right track. That I'm going to say 2 years from now they are a playoff team. So not this season, not next season, but the season after, they're in the playoffs.
So in 26.
Yep.
Okay. They didn't make a massive amount of significant changes for them this offseason, right? Like, a few.
The Newhook one was a pretty big deal.
Yeah. That's probably the major one. Obviously, Sean Monahan, they hope is healthy, so that'll be one. But their defense is fairly similar. Obviously, they bring in now Masson came in last year, but now he's in there the whole year. I really like Wi-Fi as far as an entertaining player goes. Pretty spirited scrap in game 1, but they got a pretty young defense.
Arbor Jack Eye? Is that who you're talking about?
Yeah.
Oh, like Wi-Fi. You called him Wi-Fi.
Yeah, that's his nickname.
Okay. Yeah. I was like, I was not sure where you were getting at there.
Yeah, I like his nickname. It's so unique, man. That's one of the greatest nicknames ever. Right. But you look at the defense core, and you could be right on something, but when you have that many young guys, it's just hard in defense, right? Harris and Barron and Gooley and Wi-Fi, Arajakai, they're young, right? So there's going to be some growing pains there, and they don't have the advantage of having like an elite veteran goalie behind them. So I see them finishing in the bottom of the division.
I mean, here's where I'm at. And I've said this a bunch of times when explaining the Canadiens. I think they've just made a million smart moves that when you continue to stack one upon the other, they're little, but they're impactful. Like, just look at the Tanner Pearson trade. They were going to have to waive Casey DeSmith anyway. So they trade Casey DeSmith to Van. They take on Tanner Pearson's contract, which no problem for them. It's 1 year. And they get a third-round pick to do it. Now, I'm not saying the third-round pick is definitely going to be something, but at least it gives you one more shot. And you look at their draft capital, and it's like, okay, this has been pretty impressive what they've been able to stack up.
So they had 68 points last year, and really, Dvorak and Hoffman are gone.
But look at all the guys that were injured last year.
Yeah. No, it's true.
Cole Caulfield missed most of the second half of the season. You go through their roster, and almost everyone was injured. Brendan Gallagher played 37 games. Like, I think there's a chance they don't finish last.
Who are they catching?
Detroit.
Ooh, okay. Last year, Detroit had 80 points. Montreal had 68. So yeah, let's go to the Red Wings, who 80 points, not a terrible season, but 7th in their division, shows kind of how competitive that division is. What do you make of the Detroit offseason?
Didn't like it. And I don't want to come across as a Red Wing hater, but we were just talking about the defense really in Montreal of not having the goods, and that's how I view this defense core in Detroit. And they're most of them have term, and they're all paid kind of in the middle of the pack in terms of NHL defensemen. I'll just read them to you. Ben Sherratt, Shane Gostisbehere, Justin Hall, Jake Wallman, Oli Mata, Jeff Petrie, and then you've got your elite guy in Mo Seider.
I like him a lot, by the way.
I do too. But you've got Mo Seider and then a string of number 4 to 6 defensemen.
Yeah, well, I think they believe that Jeff Petrie coming home can solidify their second pair, right?
I guess he could, but like, to what end? He's 35.
Yeah.
When you finally get to where you want to get to, Jeff Petrie is just a placeholder right now.
Yeah, well, that's what he is, right? He tries to help you get to improve this year from last year.
But that's not what their mandate is now. Their mandate is to get moving finally and get in the playoffs.
Yeah, I don't see them as a playoff team this year.
This is year 5.
Yeah.
And they've got exciting guys coming. Simon Edvinsson and all these guys. It's exciting, but this year is another year that I'm like, well, committing 3-year term to some of these guys is not the place to be.
Hey, buddy, what year they have missed the playoffs? I think 7 consecutive seasons. Is that right?
I think so.
I think it's 7. So
this is year 5 for Ken Holland in Edmonton, and I think it was 2 before that.
Yeah, so it's 7 years they've been without the playoffs, Frank. You know my number on rebuilds. It's always 8, so I won't be surprised I don't have Detroit in the playoffs this year. I think they improve. I think they're probably – I could see them going from 80 to like 84. That's where I see Detroit. I look like they made a lot of moves. Confer, DeBrincat, Costin, Sprong. I think they improved their forward group, no question. But I agree with you. Their defense group, top to bottom, isn't good enough.
Well, not only that, but their goaltending really struggled last year. Ville Husso was sub 900 last year. They brought in James Reimer, who was 890 and played 43 games for the Sharks. And then Alex Lyon, who had a great year. They're carrying 3 goalies. They're not willing to give Tampa anything. That's the funny thing about where we're at with the cap situation right now. A bunch of teams, Montreal, we just talked about, they're carrying 3 goalies, have a decision to make. with Caden Primo. He requires waivers. Alex Lyon requires waivers. The Flyers have 3 goalies right now. I think there's 5 teams carrying 3. And the point is, none of them really want to hand Tampa a goalie, especially a younger one.
Yeah. In your own division. And the thing about goaltenders is I get why, because you never know when they're going to blossom, right? Forsberg being the most recent example of that. So, some would argue Gustafsson, same thing. So I can see why teams are hesitant, because some of them probably don't even know what they have. They think he's good, but they're like, well, he's maybe not ready yet, but don't want to give him up. And especially now, would Tampa have even considered it without Vasilevsky? No. And I don't even know if now that they grabbed another goaltender, like, would they grab another one? Do you think? Like, I think they're going to run with Johansson. We'll get to Tampa near the top of this preview, but I'm not sold now if Tampa would go out and grab another goalie.
I'd be shocked if one of those good ones came through waivers that they didn't. You have to remember that we also don't know.
But then what are they going to do with him, Frank, once Vasilevsky comes back? As I think they might be higher on Johansson. That's my point.
Then just wait. Then waive him. Then throw him back in the pool.
Oh, okay.
I mean, in the meantime, you need him. Like Matt Tompkins, really?
Yeah.
He played in Sweden last year. He hasn't played in the AHL since 2021.
No.
That's not an NHL backup.
No, not at all. So you have Detroit 7th or 8th?
I'm going to say, I might regret this, but I'm going to say 8th.
8th, okay.
But you see them no higher than 7th, I think is the point, right?
No, in that division, no. It's a tough division. Like, I think they'll be an 80-point team again, but they're not going to be in the playoffs, and I'm not sure they'll be that much closer than they were last year, right? Like, they missed the playoffs by 12 points last year. You know what? It might be, well, I think they could get gained by 4, but I think the 8th place team in the East is going to be a 96-point team this year instead of 92. So they could be 4 points better, but I'm not sure they'll be any closer to the actual playoff cutoff.
I think either way, whether they finish 7th or 8th, I think the Montreal Canadiens are gaining significant ground.
Okay.
It's going to be a much closer gap than 12 points between the Habs and Wings.
Now let's move to a team that I think is going to be very interesting in how we project them. The Ottawa Senators. Of course, the big move was DeBrincat is gone. Kubalik comes in. Obviously, they added Tarasenko as well. Some of the bigger moves maybe were locking up the guys they have, mainly on the back end in young Jake Sanderson, who they're super high on. So they got Sanderson, Shabbat long-term. They got Stützle and Kachuk and Norris long-term and Drake Batherson. So they've got their core guys, even Artem Zub for another this year plus 3 more. So they kind of have their core. They went out and got Korpisalo in goal.
They got their goal.
Yeah. Let's start there. Do you think their goaltending is better?
I think unquestionably better. Look, Korpisalo last year between LA and Columbus had a great year. 39 games. He struggled a bit in the playoffs against the Oilers, but 39 games at a 917 save percentage. Like, it was pretty good. Yeah. And at his age, still being just 29, I don't see anything wrong at all with a 5-year commitment at a really reasonable $4 million a year. Like, is $4 million too much to pay your starter? I don't think so. And I think part of the reason I say that is because he's going to play in tandem with Anton Forsberg, who I'm a believer in, that I think can be a really solid 1B. So I think their goalie situation is figured out. I really like where the Sens are. I really like what they've built. I think for me, though, the sum of their parts, is it better than, like, that's the only way you can judge them, is to ask the question of, are they better than Tampa? Are they better than Toronto, Boston? Especially even the way last season finished, 5 points back of the Sabres, are they better than Buffalo? The answer for all of those questions to me right now is no. And part of the reason why is they've continually shot themselves in the foot to start every year. They lost their opener again. It's one game. It's against the team in Carolina that many are expecting to at least be a cup semifinalist, if not a finalist, and they have an authentic chance to win. But what does that mean moving forward for the Sens? They got to get off to a good start. You cannot sink your season again. 6-12-1, dunzo.
No. Well, Shane, hey, you know what? The Shane Pinto negotiations, I don't think has helped them at all.
It's not even a negotiation. This is the worst part. It's done. The negotiation, I believe they've agreed to terms on what that number is and for how long. He's in Ottawa. It's not a thing. They need to unload a player from their team in order to make room. Or they need to place Josh Norris on LTIR and punt it down the road a couple weeks, which they don't really want to do because they don't think he's that far away.
Yeah, so that's not great. And I think the big question in Ottawa this year, Frank, is, now that you bring in kind of the new boss in Steve Staios. And, I know that, the GM and they've said, hey, we're going to work together and it's great to have help. But anytime you have a new owner who's come in with a guy he's worked with a lot before in Steve Staios, we know how this works. Eventually you look to say, do we want our own guys? Not always. We've seen some organizations where they come in, they bring in a new person. He doesn't make any changes and it works. But DJ Smith is one of the longer tenured coaches now in the NHL. They haven't made the playoffs.
5 years.
Yeah. What do you make of him in Ottawa, and how thin is the ice for the head coach and potentially GM in Ottawa?
It's thinner than your hairline, which is pretty damn thin.
Yeah.
I wish
that's right. Wait a second. My hairline's really full, just not in the front or the top. It's sick in the back.
Yeah, it's tremendous in the back. I think he's on the hottest seat in the NHL in a year in which there's kind of next to no one even really in his category. Think of another coach that you think is even kind of in a tenuous position. You really can't, unless someone that's on a good team falls out of the gate, but no one's starting the year. You were like, oh yeah, that guy might not make it to November.
No.
That has to be the case with DJ Smith. How many poor starts can you get off to as a team before the axe needs to drop on someone? And I personally, watching this all play out with Pinto and the mismanagement of their cap,
but that's not the coach's fault. That's just
it should be right. I'm saying the axe falling shouldn't be all that far behind for Pierre Dorion.
Yeah. Okay.
I mean, I'll give you it's a small example, but here's a good one. Okay. So Michael Del Zotto is on their cap for $750 this year. And you think, okay, like $750, not really that big of a deal. But a couple years ago, they had an offer from teams, I think multiple teams, in fact, to have them retain half. So it would have been $1 million. And for 1 year, it would have been off the books. And instead, they decided to buy him out, which extended the cap penalty, which now has him on the books for another year. So instead of just getting out from under it and sucking it up for the 1 year, you've doubled the pain, and now he's $750 this year, and that's 1/3 of what you need to pay Shane Pinto, or close to it.
Yeah.
Pull the trigger. Get whatever the price is to get rid of Matthew Joseph or whoever it is that you want to move. Just do it and get on with the season.
Well, it'll be fascinating to watch, because I agree with you. In that division, Ottawa isn't good enough to overcome a bad start. They're just not. So now, even if I didn't have Ottawa as a playoff team, Frank. I actually have them finishing exactly where they did last year in that division, which is 6th. I don't see them moving up over any of those teams. They might get closer. They might get to 90 points, but I don't see them as a playoff team. Where do you have them?
Yeah, I have them also finishing 6th.
And any fun prediction on it? Will we see a change before Christmas in Ottawa?
Yes.
Okay. Now the top 5, and this is where I think it's going to get a little spicy. We'll start with the Buffalo Sabres, because, of course, they finished 5th last year. They missed the playoffs by 1 point. They obviously have the longest current drought without playoffs. It's been over a decade since they've been in the postseason. They finished strong, 7-2-1 in their last 10 and just came up 1 point short of Florida. You know what? Some of their biggest moves this offseason, of course, have been locking up their guys on their back end. They get Rasmus Dahlin, 11 mil. He eats up some years of UFA. Not as many years of UFA, but Owen Power was announced. His contract comes through. Pretty big deal for him on the back end, Frank, at just over 8. What do you make of these 2 deals? Let's start there first and kind of building their core from the back end out.
I like the deal a lot. We've talked in the preseason about the deal for Jake Sanderson at 8.05. I think, having more time under his belt, I think Owen Power is a step beyond that right now. And to see him come in for 7 years, so you get 1 fewer year and slight bump on the AAV to 8.35. I just love that they're kind of very similar to Ottawa in the timeline of how this is all structured. You've got every important critical piece on your team locked up for the long term. Cousins, Tage Thompson, both guys on the back end, Matthias Samuelsson at half that rate for 8 years. They've got their young goalies. I think they've got everything you could possibly want. A stud scorer and huge presence in Tage Thompson. You're the president of the Tage Thompson fan club. Like, there's nothing I really don't like about the Sabres.
Yeah, the only concern I have about the Sabres is goaltending and their overall youth. Like, if you know what, they're a young team. Now, Eric Comrie isn't young. He's 28 years of age, right? But he doesn't have a ton of NHL experience as games played. And then you've got Devin Levi and Ukko-Pekka Luukkonen in goal right now. So now it's just a question. It's not a massive concern, but it's a slight concern for me is, can Devin Levi be that guy? It's hard to do. I think he's like the first goalie since like 1982 or 80 to come directly from college. Now, I know Tom Barrasso came directly from high school, which is pretty amazing, but it just doesn't happen.
Still
very
crazy,
often, Frank, right? Not saying
it really kind of never happens. Like, think of every pedigreed goalie you can imagine.
Yeah.
Carey Price, even pick a more recent guy, Thatcher Demko, Carter Hart. Like, almost none of those guys have come through and completely skipped the AHL. It's
hard, man. So
doesn't happen.
Yeah. And if Devin Levi does, it just shows you how good he is. And I'm not saying he can't do it. So it's just, it's unique. Where there's always exceptions to every rule. There's outliers everywhere. And maybe he's one of them, but it's a storyline to watch. But man, I like the make of their team. I really like Dahlin. I think Owen Power in a few years, Frank, he might be better than Rasmus Dahlin, which is crazy because you got the kind of those two on the back end in Buffalo. That is massive to be able to build your team around 2 defensemen like that. They brought in Connor Clifton and Eric Johnson to give him a little bit of experience on the back end, which I think is very important with their young players. You mentioned Samuelsson, Henry Jokiharju, Jacob Bryson. They got a good mix on their back end. Up front, they didn't really make a lot of changes. It's going to be some more young guys, but Tage Thompson, Dylan Cousins, Jeff Skinner's been actually really good the last few years.
Yeah, Alex, I mean, it's not $9 million, but he's fine.
No, he's like, hey, he's a 35 goal scorer, man. You'll take that. It's not like he's getting paid $9 million and doing nothing. So I like a lot about Buffalo. My concern is last year, 5-on-5, Frank, they were bad. Like, they gave up a lot 5-on-5. So as a team, can they improve their 5-on-5 play defensively? If they do, then I think they're a playoff team. I actually picked them. I picked them 4th. I picked him to end the drought this year. Team Tage Thompson ends the drought in Buffalo. Where do you have?
I'm with you. I'm in. Sabres in.
Yeah, so it'll be exciting.
Sabres in.
They got a good fan base. It's been a long time. What is it? 12 years, I think, since the Sabres made the
longest.
playoffs?
I think it's the longest drought in pro sports, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, well, I know it's the longest NHL in NHL history, right? Edmonton and Florida used to be at 10. So, Sabres fans have endured a lot.
Feels like forever.
Yeah. So hopefully this is their year for them.
I've got Buffalo 3rd. I don't even have them as a wild card team. I just like them.
Third?
Yep.
Wow. Yeah, the last year they were in was 2011. So.
Yeah, I covered all 7 of those games in that series as the Flyers used 3 goalies.
Yeah, 12 years. So Sabres fans, we hope the drought is over. We'll get to the other 4 teams who all made the playoffs last year, but first we'll bring in Tyler Yaremchuk. Ty, how you doing?
What's up, boys? I am doing good. We had our Oilers Nation season launch party yesterday, so I'm a little hungover, but I'm not bad.
Shocking.
Pace
What?
yourself.
Yeah. Early in the year, 81 more. All right, let's get into buy or sells brought to you by
Must have been a lot of drinks at that one, because if you were drinking every time Vancouver scored a goal, whoo.
Yeah, we had there was 100 some tickets we sold, bunch of Oilers fans in the bar, and there was one guy in a Canucks jersey. He had the best night.
I bet he did.
All right. Yeah. Let's dig into buy or sell brought to you by our friends at Botano, 19 plus. Please play responsibly. How about Auston Matthews? Last night, you guys touched on it off the top of the show, popping home 3 goals. You buying or selling on Auston Matthews being a 60 goal scorer this year, Frank?
Buying. I mean, what's not to buy? He's done it already. He's won the Hart Trophy. Last year was so incredibly disappointing. And I even still talking about the Leafs sizing up their season, people still were not really talking about the fact that he only had 40 last year. Not to say that's nothing, but you're not paying Auston Matthews that kind of coin to score 40. And you can talk all you want about, the back checking and, he's close to a Selke level. Sorry, that's not why he's getting paid. So he needs to get back to that level, and having a hat trick on opening night yet again. That's his day of the year. That's a hell of a way to do it. So I'm in.
Well, I love goals, and he's one of the few guys who scored 60. As long as he doesn't miss more than 10 games, I think he's got a real chance. And that's, you know what, unfortunately for him, there's always been, a little nagging injury here or there that costs you 5, 6, 7 games. And that can be the difference of a 60-goal season. Like 60 goals is damn hard. I know we've seen it lately here with Matthews and McDavid and Pasternak. And so people are like, oh yeah, no big deal. It's still really hard to do. So I will bet on Matthews doing it, though. I would take the over.
On the other side of that matchup last night, there was Cole Caulfield. He was one of my favorite fantasy hockey picks this year just because he was kind of undervalued. I think maybe the injuries made some people forget how good of a goal scorer he could be. Does he have 50 goal potential this year, though? Jay, are you buying or selling on 50 for Caulfield?
I will sell on 50 for Caulfield. 50 goals is damn hard, man.
Yeah.
And, and it's even harder when one gets called off in game 1. So, that's unfortunate for him. But, I could see Caulfield scoring 40 plus, but not 50.
Frank?
I made the prediction, so I'm obviously in.
You're in. That was one of your bold predictions?
Yeah, was that Cole Caulfield joins the 50-goal club.
All right.
I don't remember. Definitely clicked on it. You definitely clicked on it.
Yeah, I now that you say it, I'm like, oh yeah, that is definitely the inspiration here. And now I'm starting to question my third one, and I'm like, wait, did Frank also have this one in his bold predictions? Devin Levi Calder finalist, buy or sell?
No, what I had was look, Connor Bedard scoring 100 points. Like, I'm sorry, that gets you the Calder.
Yeah.
But if you were one of those guys that were sitting there in the preseason saying, I really like Logan Cooley and Connor Bedard's really good, maybe those two guys cancel each other out. Who could it be? I have the Sabres as a playoff team. That means that inherently Devin Levi had a good season. He's the long shot Calder guy.
Fair enough.
And you mentioned it, Jay. Tom Barrasso being inducted into the Hockey Hall of Fame in 1 month's time. 18 years old, goes from high school hockey to winning the Calder and the Vezina in the same season. Still the most bananas rookie year ever.
Jay, you buying or selling on Levi as a Calder finalist?
Well, Stuart Skinner was a finalist last year, so goalies. But here's the challenge. I think if Buffalo is close, then yes. But I think there's going to be some pretty good offensive numbers, and lots of times people gravitate towards the offense. So finalist, yeah, I still think he'll be a finalist, but I don't think he'll win.
All right, so one of the final 3. Last one I have for you guys before you get to the top tier of this division. Last year, the Bruins had 135 points. That's probably going to come down. Maybe some more points being sprinkled throughout the division leads me to 4 100-point teams in the Atlantic. The Pacific Division did it last year. I'm going to say the Atlantic is the division that gets it done this year. You buying or selling, Jay?
I will sell. I don't see 400-point teams in the Atlantic this year. There'll probably be 3. Most divisions have 3. I don't see them having 4.
Frank?
Yeah, I think with all those points from the Bruins being redistributed back to the division, I think you're going to have a couple 100-point teams, and you're going to have like 6 teams or 7 teams somewhere between, not 7, 6, 5 or 6 other teams in the division that are somewhere between 90 and 100. I think it's going to be really bunched up.
I think the entire East, the entire league could be very, very bunched up this year compared to years past. All right, that is a wrap on this week's edition of Buy or Sell.
Now, let's get to the teams who were in the top 4 last year. Both Frank and I have Buffalo in the top 4 this year, so someone's coming out. We'll find out who it is. Frank, the Florida Panthers made it all the way to the Stanley Cup final last year. And if you look at the Panthers this season, I think the biggest offseason story is not so much who are the new faces. We'll get to some of the new faces on their team, but it's more so which of their returning guys aren't ready, and specifically on the back end. When you have Aaron Ekblad and Brandon Montour both out. Now, Ekblad's on LTIR as we speak. Montour is only on IR. So that would suggest that maybe he's going to be the first one back. Doesn't sound like either one of them's coming back in October, maybe in November for Montour. We'll see. So can they overcome their top 2 D-men being out for potentially 2 months?
My answer is no. And my answer is based on, yeah, they've got a fantastic forward core. I think 2 top 20 players in the league in Tkachuk and Barkov. But I'm sorry, the defense that's left in their wake, Bill Zito pegged the timeline, the rough timeline for both guys as December 15th. We just talked about the Sens and how their season was over last year in mid-November.
Mm-hmm.
And it's funny because we did have this same kind of conversation last preseason about the Bruins and all the guys that they were missing. But I think the things that would need to go right for Florida in order to be in the mix, can Sergei Bobrovsky play the way he played in the playoffs for 2 months to start the year? I mean, I guess it's possible, but I wouldn't bet on it. And just the defensemen that are left there, I think it's bottom 5 in the league right now. I really like Forsling. I think Ekman Larson at 2.25 is going to be just fine. But Nico Mikkola, Mike Riley, Dmitry Kulikov, Josh Mahora, and one of the real eye-openers in camp, Uvis Balinskis. I don't know if I'm saying that right, but he was someone that kind of came out of the clear blue sky playing in the Czech League last year.
Yeah.
27 years old, undrafted.
Well, hey, that happens, man. Late developers, there's always a few of them. But, I look at the Panthers. I still have them in, and only because I love their forward group. Now, obviously, the Barkov and Tkachuk are great. The injury early on here is not going to be great for, we'll see. Now, what are you hearing on the injury to Reinhart? How long he'll be out?
I don't know.
Okay. But Bennett, I really like Carter Verhaeghe is one of the more underrated players, I think, in the NHL. He's great value every year for what he brings. I like Anton Lundell.
If you score 40 goals and have 73 points, you can't be called underrated anymore. Can you?
Well, I think so, because very few people ever talk about him. Like when they talk about
I don't think that's true. I think his path and like the way he went from being waiver guy to getting a shot in Tampa to being plucked by the Panthers, like I think people have talked about him a lot over the last couple of years.
Yeah, but they've talked
those
about
type of guys come along once every 6 years, 7 years.
Yeah, like they've talked about his story and his path, but I think he should be talking about what he does now, not where he came from, is all I'm saying. Like he might have been the most quieted, talked about 40 goal scorer in the league. That's all I mean.
Yeah, well, he plays in Florida, so That's usually those two things go hand in hand, no?
Yeah, well, Kachuk gets a lot of fanfare, and Barkov, and rightfully so. They're good, but I just like Verhaeghe. I think, there's something about Florida. I don't know what it is. You talked earlier about you think Montreal has that fight in them. I think Florida has that. They will scrap their way, and I think that Florida finds a way to stay in the mix until their defense gets back.
Okay. I can see. I mean, look, last year, Christmas, 7 points out of a playoff spot.
Yeah.
They went to the Cup final. But
yeah.
I also just think for this team, there's not really that much margin for error.
Fair.
It's not like they were a 135-point team last year. They snuck in and really lost their way in and then just went on an incredible run. So to say, my bold prediction was that they're the third team in the last 4 years to go to the Cup final and then miss the next year. It happens somewhat regularly.
Yeah, no, hey, it does. And hey, if Florida doesn't make it, I'm not shocked. I think it's an interesting division to see who's going to be in or out, especially the team that I picked to be out. People are going to be like, you're an idiot for picking them to be out. So we'll get to that in a second. Now we go to the team who finished third last season, 98 points, the Tampa Bay Lightning. And this is one of their longest off seasons in a long time, Frank, and also one where they have made significant change. Killorn's gone, Colton's gone, Maroon's gone, Belmar's gone. They bring in Sheary and Mott and Watson and Glendening, DeHaan on the back end. Obviously, the injury to Vasilevsky is huge, but they still have Point. They still have Kucherov. They still have Stamkos, Hedman, Cernak, Sergachev, go down the list. I have Tampa as a playoff team, and I actually have them finishing second in the division.
Second, okay. I have them as a playoff team. I have them as a wild card team. And
Okay.
Part of that is not just because of the Vasilevsky injury, but I haven't seen really much evidence that they care about the regular season. That sounds more harsh than it's intended to. It's just that they've been on autopilot for so long. Maybe to your point, finishing second, maybe this injury sort of snaps their attention to having a really good regular season.
Possibly, yeah. I sometimes, Frank, when you lose a key player, others are like, okay, you know what? We got to be on their game. Because let's be honest, I think in the back of your mind, you're like, you know what? Our goalie will stop it for us. Not that you openly think that way, but it's a nice security blanket to have. And they've had that with the best goalie in the league for the last many years. And look at how many times you know what? They're getting outshot heavily. And they're like, oh, Tampa Bay wins. And Vasilevsky has 40 saves or 35 saves, and they're giving up quality shots. And people are like, yeah, but Vasilevsky's great, which he is. And so I actually think this will help Tampa. A, they're more rested than we've seen in a long time. And I do think over time that matters. And B, I think this will force them to kind of maybe batten down the hatches a bit. And then when Vasilevsky comes back, oh my goodness, like what a huge momentum boost that's going to be for that team.
Yeah. I mean, he's all world. So here's the thing I come back to every time that people count out the Lightning. And I saw some people saying, oh, not going to make the playoffs. And I'm going, Hedman, Sergachev, Point, Stamkos, Kucherov. Tell me those five guys. Give me five other players in the league that you're going to stack up toe-to-toe against them.
Yeah.
Head-to-head, winner take all, 5-on-5. No one comes off the ice until you score 100. How many times are they losing? Honestly.
Yeah, no, it's fair. It's very fair. Like they've got the unique setup of having an elite player at forward, multiple, defense, and goal. And there's just not like, look at the other great teams in the league. Can you say that about any of them where they have elite goalie, elite defense, elite forwards?
The Edmonton Oilers have the two best players in the world, but they don't have an elite defenseman and they don't have an elite goalie.
Yeah, Toronto doesn't have an elite goalie.
Toronto doesn't have an elite defenseman. Like,
right.
They're all these things, and I think elite, probably should be careful about how we say that, because I do think Darnell Nurse is on the upper echelon, and I do think Morgan Riley's on the upper echelon.
They're not top 10.
Yeah, but they're not Victor Hedman. They're not multi-time Norris Trophy winners.
Mhm.
And that's a big difference. There's
Yeah,
a big difference between being in the top 10 and being in the top 3.
yeah, like Boston has one. Colorado, I don't think Georgiev's there yet.
Nope.
You could argue that now the Rangers probably Panarin would maybe be on the low end of elite forwards, but he's close, right? But Fox and Shesterkin are definitely there, right? Like it's hard, and Tampa's had it for this long, and they're going to have it for how many more years, and that's why they're always in the mix for me.
Yeah, I mean, look, it's special, and they've won 2 cups on their back. So
And lost another one.
yeah, and lost another one, and I'd yeah.
And honestly, I think, Frank, like Braden Point might be their best forward right now.
Oh God, that's a debate. It's a debate I'm not willing to have just because Kucherov still 100+ points last year again.
Yeah, Point had 50 goals.
I know he had 51. I don't think I had him scoring 50 this year.
That's hard, man. But like Braden Point, center ice, gritty, kills penalties on the power play. Like Tampa gets a lot of talk about. Like, honestly, I think we'll have to have that discussion one day and ask people, you get one forward in Tampa right now, who are you picking? And I think it would be a really good discussion.
That's why I said it's a debate I'm not willing to have.
Yeah, so it's a good one. So I have them second. You have them fourth in the division as the wild card.
Yep.
Okay. So that leaves Toronto and Boston. We'll get to the Maple Leafs and Toronto, of course, at a team that some significant turnover. They bring in, and really they change their makeup a little bit. Like, look at the guys they brought in: Bertuzzi, Domi, Reeves, Klingberg, Gregor. And so they obviously, Klingberg's not necessarily an overly gritty guy, but the other guys are. They still have their core intact with Matthews and Marner and Nylander, who's doesn't get talked about probably as much for what he does. Morgan Riley, Samsonov's now the guy in goal for them this season. Like, Toronto's good. I have them winning the division in the regular season, Frank. And, of course, everybody will say, well, what do you do in the playoffs? And that's valid. But right now we're just talking about the regular season. And I think Toronto's got a pretty good team and a really good chance to win that division.
I think they're the class of the division. I think they win it probably somewhat easily by a decent enough margin. I like the changes they made. I really look, they tried a different mix under a different manager last year at the deadline. They went out and changed out almost a third of their team and probably went a little bit overboard, I think, in sacrificing some speed to try and get a little bit tougher, to try and add more leadership. Ryan O'Reilly and Luke Shen and these other guys that came in. But when you really boil it down, when you're able to swap in guys like Bertuzzi and Domi, you're in a really good position because not only are they annoying to play against, but Bertuzzi should score 30 goals this year.
Yeah.
I called him Brad Marchand light last year when we talked about him heading into the playoffs with Boston. Yeah. That's what he is. He's not as skilled, but he's a total pain in the ass, and he's talented. He's good. He's a good player.
Oh, he's a really good player. You know what? And I think Bertuzzi's one where it kind of leaves you wanting more. I think there's more there. We haven't seen enough consistency from him. And I think if it ever all comes together, you're right. 30-goal season that's not out of the question at all.
Yeah. So it's essentially Bertuzzi, Domi, and Nyes in, and Bunting, Malgin, and Engvall out.
Oh, well, they changed their fourth line too, right? Their fourth line is very different.
Yeah, no, by the way, we did see a Noah Gregor goal in the opening game of the year. Not a big deal.
Posting in, buddy. No big deal.
Love to see that. So I would say this team has improved, and I think it's hard to say that this team hasn't been one of the very best teams in the league the last number of years. It's just that the biggest thing they need to change is when they get to the playoffs, There isn't a single team in the league that's been afraid of the Toronto Maple Leafs. It's almost like teams take a certain amount of joy, especially in opening there to start a series and winning one of the first 2 games and planting a seed of doubt that just seems to grow and grow like Jack and the Beanstalk.
Yeah, no, that's fair. I look at Toronto and I really think, Brad Treliving at the deadline and what he's going to do to augment his blue line is going to be their main move. That, you might want to bring in one other forward. Okay, sure. I don't think it has to be a top 6 forward at all. I think they've got more than enough top 6 talent there. You might bring in a third line guy, potentially, maybe. We'll see how the season goes. But I think it's, they would like, to me, you need a little bit more of a stalwart defender who's just, okay, this is our guy. We put him out there. He's going to help our overall defense. He doesn't necessarily have to be your best overall defenseman, Frank. He just has to be a solidifying force on your blue line. And I think that's got to be the goal for Treliving at the deadline.
It's kind of the same thing we've been saying for years for the Leafs at the deadline. That's the problem.
Well,
is that there really hasn't
Different
been
guy.
any progress on that front. And there really wasn't any this summer either.
No, and that's what I'm saying. That to me is now it's a new GM and that's the move. And so we'll see, like a guy like Matthias Ekholm came available last year. Nobody 3 weeks before the deadline, a month, nobody really thought he was available. Then he became available. And so you have to find a way to make that deal work. If now guys like Ekholm don't come available all the time, but that to me that's what Treliving's going to have to be looking for, is a trade similar to that where you can bring in a guy who is going to solidify your back end.
Mm-hmm. They need it.
So we both have them finishing first in the regular season, which comes to the record-breaking Boston Bruins, who had 135 points in the regular season, the most ever wins. 2 records, Frank, that honestly I think are going to be extremely difficult for anybody to beat moving forward.
Well, the Lightning just got there, and now the Bruins a couple years
but they went
later
even higher, and 65 wins, man. It's ridiculous.
Yeah.
Right? It's truly ridiculous when you think about it. So, obviously I know how it ended, blowing a 3-1 lead in the series, and then a 3-1 lead in game 7 was the worst possible ending to that season for Boston. Bergeron retires, Krejci retires, they trade Taylor Hall, they move and Nick Foligno. They made a lot of changes. Their goaltending's still good. I think their back end maybe got better with the addition of Orlov, but you know what, Frank? I probably could have put it in your bold predictions because I actually have Boston missing the playoffs this year. And that's easily one where I know Bruins fans are going to say you're an idiot, and I might look like an idiot, but I really think they're going to miss their centerman a lot more than people think.
I don't doubt that they're going to miss their centerman. Here's the problem with the problem with your prediction, because I thought about this and I actually debated this because when I do the 32 bold, I come up with my own, but I'm always fielding GMs, front office people, assistant GMs, agents, players. Give me a bold prediction. It's all anonymous. And someone said Boston makes the playoff or misses the playoffs. And I said, okay, but look at their defense and then look at their goaltending, which kind of universally is ranked as the number 1 tandem, meaning the 2 of them together. McAvoy, Lindholm, Brandon Carlo, they're not going anywhere. As long as those guys are healthy, you talked about this stat and I've used it a bunch. They can give back almost 18 wins and still have 100 points. I just don't see they'd have to be 40 to 43 points worse this season to not make it. And I'm sorry, but with that defense, and you've got a 50-goal scorer in Pasternak, new captain in Brad Marchand, I think they've got plenty to make the playoffs, and I have them finishing second. Compelling argument or no?
No, trust me, as I said, I can easily see why people would say the Bruins are going to make the playoffs. It's probably dumb to pick them not. But they had everything go well for them last season on a variety of fronts. And I think Patrice Bergeron was so important to that team. And losing not only him, but David Krejci, who probably doesn't get the respect for how
It's
good he was.
huge.
A little bit overshadowed because you have Pasternak and Marchand and Bergeron. That's fine. But I just think David Krejci was, man, like he was really good. And if you look at the overall health of their team, Frank, like I know they started the season without but Brad Marchand only missed 9 games, right? Like I remember at the start of the season, we were talking, oh my goodness, but he only missed 9 games, right? Charlie McAvoy only missed 15. They were pretty healthy with their best players all year long. And that to me, maybe it happens again, but I think they're so weakened down the middle that injuries, which will occur, and these aren't injuries, these guys aren't coming back. Other injuries are going to occur, and I think it might be difficult for them. So
I'm looking at their top 6 right now on our dailyfaceoff.com line combos.
Yeah.
First line, JVR with Pavel Zacha and David Pasternak. I think JVR is going to have a bounce back year. Second line, Brad Marchand, Charlie Coyle, Jake DeBrusk. Third line, Trent Frederick, Matthew Poitras, which is one of the great names in the league this year, and Morgan Geekie. Is it thin? Sure. But like, I don't think it's crippling. Like, don't you think Pasternak driving play on the wing and Marchand driving play on his wing is enough to, especially with those two guys on separate lines, is enough to be credible? That's
Possibly,
really all I'm asking.
Yeah, no, and it's fair, but keep in mind, those two have played together a lot lately, right? And they had unbelievable chemistry. And so now you separate them. Does that weak because, no offense to the other guys, Marchand and Pasternak are now not playing with as an elite player as they were the last few years. They're just not taking away Bergeron. I'm talking about each other because they're on separate lines. And so that to me is what you look at it. So they've had it, like Frank, that line in Boston. I know they didn't play as much together last year, but it's been one of the great lines in the NHL for many years.
Yeah.
Like, Brad Marchand, Bergeron are very good offensively and incredibly good defensively. Pasternak's an absolute sniper. He's so good. And now that line's gone. And that line was like, they could win games themselves.
Are two guys enough for a 43-point drop-off? That's what you're saying.
But it's not just those two. It's also because now you split up Pasternak and Marchand.
There's always a trickle-down effect. 43 points is a lot to lose. We've seen teams gain 43 or 40 in a season and say, holy smokes, what a turnaround. So it is possible. It's the NHL. Anything is possible. I would just bet against it.
And the reason why is because when I look at Boston, Frank, they had basically the same teams in previous years, and they were, 107 points in 2022. Good team, right? They had 73 points in 56, which I think was on pace for like 108. Like the 135 was unexpected. It was ridiculously good. Everything had to go right. Their goaltending going to have like a 935 save percentage again? You know what I mean? So I would look and say, if we go by what Boston normally is, 107-point team, if I say losing Bergeron and Krejci means you're going to lose 12 points, it seems more, oh, okay, that's plausible. And so that's what I went off of. I didn't go off the 135 because it was, of course, they were going to have even if Bergeron and Krejci came back, I would say they're going to lose 20 points just because the odds are you can't be that good back to back. Right. So that's where my number was more around 107. And I thought that losing those two would be the difference in 12 points, 6 wins. And that puts you right on the cusp of making the playoffs.
It'll be fascinating.
Yeah. No, it's going to be fun.
That's why hockey's fun. Anything can happen.
Yeah. Like I'm actually
any given year, your stat is still crazy. 5 points every year. There's turnover. 5 teams every year. There's turnover.
Yeah. That's minimum. Like some years there was 7. So
out of 16.
And I only picked 4. And then I uncovered that stat and I was like, God, now I should have picked 5.
Yeah.
Because I only have 4 teams missing that made the playoffs last year. Now I wish I would have picked a 5th. Just going off of, because that's, like I said to all of our listeners, that's not the average 5. It's minimum 5 every year since they put in this format of the wild card and the 2 divisions. Every year there's been at least 5 teams in that weren't in the year before. And so I only have 4 overall. And now I wish I would have picked 5.
Well,
how many do you have? Let me look.
4
I'm going to go to Daily Faceoff. I'm looking at who you have. So you have Buffalo in, who wasn't in, and you have Pittsburgh, who wasn't in.
And I have Florida out and the Islanders out.
Yeah, and then you have Calgary and Vancouver. So you're like me. You have 4 as well.
Yeah.
And we have the same in the West, and but different in the we both have the Islanders out. So you have Florida out. I have Boston out. So we'll see who's right. Frankie, have yourself a good weekend. Hopefully the goals keep coming in the NHL. Hey, by the way, Brett Howden suspension, headshot. I'm thinking there's going to be another suspension for the Taylor Hall hit.
I don't think so, but we'll see.
No. Okay.
No, I thought he caught him from the side and on the shoulder. I can understand why they don't like it. Maybe they thought the timing was off. They don't like the way that his head goes after the contact, but I think it was a result of the contact with the shoulder that sends the head there.
Okay.
But we'll see.
We'll see. Frank, have yourself a great weekend.
Thank you for watching the DFO Rundown. Hit the subscribe button to never miss a show. And for more, visit dailyfaceoff.com.